You're a good person. No one thinks you're gonna turn out like your father.
But then why would you even say it?
Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Ryan Airy, and this is all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in Season 2, Episode 2 of... And guys, we are loving this season, and especially this episode with its focus on Mark and his mom's grief following what went down with Omni-Man last season. Your father or husband turning out to be an evil, genocidal tyrant who had been lying to you for years is not exactly something you get over in just a month.
Is Mom's life worthless?
In the grand scheme of things, yes.
So I'm really loving the attention to detail and getting to feel the ramifications of Omni-Man's betrayal still echoing throughout this entire series. So we kick things off with Mark's high school graduation, only Mark isn't there. This reminded me so much of the opening of The Amazing Spider-Man 2 when Peter Parker is late to his own graduation because he's off doing his superhero thing just like Mark. So Mark is in DC fighting a villain we met last season called Doc Seismic.
Professor Seismic, right?
Doc Seismic. I never taught.
Mark asks Seismic what's with him and historical monuments, a reference to their big previous fight on Mount Rushmore.
I liked you better when you just hated presidents.
So this scene on the Washington Monument also reminded me of another Spider-Man movie, Spider-Man Homecoming.
I'm gonna die.
And here we see the arrival of the Magma Knights, these lava-type creatures that were first introduced in issue 4 of the Invincible comics. They serve Doc Seismic, which seems like a reference to the Moloids serving Mole Man in the Fantastic Four comics. So when Mark finally makes it to graduation, we see him throw his hat way further in the air than everyone else. And this is a fun reminder that while Mark has certainly come a long way in mastering his abilities, he's also got a long ways to go. This scene is also taken directly from the comic book. Now, this might be a bit of a reach, but when I saw this shot, it immediately reminded me of The Lion King and Pride Rock. Pride Rock being where King Mufasa had his son and future King Simba presented to the world. Now, Lion King is a story about a father and a son, lineage, birthright, and responsibility, and Invincible is about the same thing. This episode specifically had a deep focus on lineage, destiny, and the connection between Mark Grayson's Invincible and his father, Omni-Man. Mark wants to fill his father's shoes and use his inherited powers to be Earth's new protector, but he doesn't want to become the monster his father was revealed to be.
I'm not my dad. I'm not my dad.
Now, Adam Eve reveals to Mark and the gang that she'll be joining the Chicago cleanup, a reference to Chicago's destruction following Mark and his father's giant battle last season.
I'm gonna go help finish the reconstruction up in Chicago. Sorry, I didn't mean to make that weird for you or...
Eve's apology for bringing this up is the first of many in this episode that Mark receives for mentions of his father. Now in this scene, we also get a fun look at just how powerful Adam Eve is with the ability to manipulate atoms, something we also got an in-depth look at in the Adam Eve special prequel episode. So it was interesting to see Mark turn down a beer, citing that he's on call.
Mark?
I'm on call. Cecil might need me.
Now why is that interesting? Seems responsible to me.
Well, it's just that this is seemingly confirmation that Mark can become drunk like any mortal man.
Julian.
Unlike in Marvel and DC comics, where characters like Superman, Flash, and Captain America aren't even affected by alcohol intake.
I can't get drunk.
Now here we meet back up with the astronauts from Season 1 that Mark accompanied on a mission to Mars.
They were gonna execute us. We barely got off that rock alive.
Now the astronauts were held captive by the Martians, and were going to be executed. The Martians feared that any or all of the astronauts could have been infected with a parasitic race of aliens called the Sequids.
If those Sequids ever take over, Earth is next. We need to strike first.
Now the Martians were immune to the Sequids, but they feared if just one of the human astronauts had been infected, then they could destroy Earth and then in turn destroy Mars. Mark was able to save the astronauts from their execution and return them safely to Earth. Only one of the astronauts was replaced by one of these shape-shifting Martians. So when Eve shows up in Chicago, we saw her powers put to use with the restoration of this family's apartment, as well as turning this lot into a community park. Now we hear mention of government red tape and bureaucrats, but this is all foreshadowing the catastrophe to come.
The whole lot was unstable. That's why the city never built there.
Now, speaking of rebuilding what Omni-Man destroyed, we see Debbie and Mark having trouble getting their cabinets to shut following the rebuilding of their home after episode 1. So this is meant to represent the unresolved trauma following Nolan's betrayal of his wife and son. This is a physical reminder of the pain and destruction that Nolan caused, and how it's yet to be fully repaired and perhaps never will be.
You can't fix this one, buddy.
The theme of guilt surrounding Mark and his father is continued when we get this exchange between Mark and his mom.
You're a good person. No one thinks you're gonna turn out like your father.
Then why would you even say it?
Sticking with the theme of this episode and seemingly this season overall, Mark lives in constant fear that he'll turn out like his father, while simultaneously trying to fill the shoes of the hero that his father pretended to be. Now back at the Guardians headquarters, we see Rex Splode get a taste of his own medicine. In season 1, we see Rex cheating on Eve in the shower with Duplicate. Well, now it's Rex who walks in on Duplicate and Immortal. At our undercover Martian's apartment, formerly home to astronaut Russ, we can see mail piled up in a dead plant. And it's this attention to detail that I really appreciate. He wouldn't know how to answer mail, or that he would need to water plants because they don't have plants on Mars.
Every little detail in place, down to the crown molding.
Now on TV, he's watching a special memorial report on Martian Man, a former member of the Guardians who was killed last season by Omni-Man. Martian Man, of course, is a reference to the Martian Manhunter, and the Martians in this universe actually look like the Martians' native form that they have when they live on Mars. As Invincible flies over the city, we can see him look down at the Burger Mart, the same place he and Cecil met in the previous episode. Now he's looking down at people his age hanging out and having fun while he's on the clock as a superhero.
I work all night, I work all day to pay the bills I have to pay.
And I love the parallel here of Mark having begged Cecil at this very restaurant to let him come work for him as a superhero. And now, as he's flying off on a mission for Cecil, he's looking back at that same restaurant, likely thinking about how he could be spending time with his friends. Remember, this is also the restaurant that Mark worked at in season 1 before he got his powers. After he got his powers, he quit. So this restaurant for him represents normalcy, the kind of life that he left behind as soon as he became a superhero. And here we get another awkward apology when Cecil brings up Darkwing and how he was murdered by Omni-Man.
We've had multiple corroborated sightings of Darkwing, which is perturbing me considering that I personally ID'd what was left of his ribcage last year. Oh, sorry.
And then we get to see Midnight City, a city that was cursed by the Midnight Magician that we've heard mentioned in the comics. Now, Midnight City was inspired by Batman the Animated Series Gotham City, hence the red sky. So it's only fitting that the Batman-inspired Darkwing is from that city. Now, of course, this isn't the original Darkwing. Like Cecil said, he's dead. This is Nightboy, a play on Robin, Red Robin, and Nightwing. He has taken up the mantle of Darkwing following his death, just like Tim Drake and other Robins have done for Batman in the comics. So we all know that Batman and Darkwing have no superpowers, but they're very skilled at using shadows to their advantage. So I thought it was really neat that they introduced the concept of a shadow realm. It's also worth mentioning that in the comics, we see the second Darkwing defeat an evil Invincible by pulling him into the Shadowverse. So I think this is likely going to come back into play later in the season, seeing as it's likely this season is leading to the Invincible War from the comics. It's a really cool storyline in the comics that we're not going to spoil for you here. So in this battle with the new Darkwing, Mark is faced with more grief regarding his father, keeping with the overall theme of the episode.
Like you said, I'm Omni-Man's son.
Also, the Shadow Realm that the new Darkwing pulls Mark into seems like a play on the Shadow World that Cloak uses in the Cloak and Dagger comics. Debbie confronts Cecil about Mark almost missing graduation, and they have it out about Mark's role as a hero.
Mark came to me. I'm looking out for him. I'm easing him back into the job.
It's not a job.
Again, I really like how much they're focusing on Debbie in this episode. She's reacting like any mother in her situation would. Not only does she feel betrayed by her husband, but she lives in constant fear of what could become of her son, whether it be him getting hurt or hurting others like his father did. It's also in this meeting that we get the return of Donald, who died at the hands of Omni-Man last season.
It's been an honor, sir. Who are you talking to?
Now, we'll talk a little later about how Donald is back, but in this scene in particular, Donald is serving as another physical embodiment of the pain, suffering, and death that was been caused by Nolan. At Eve's adopted parents' house, we catch up with her parents who have fallen on hard times.
Things have been a little tight lately financially, but we're fine, really, sweetie.
Now, in the Adam and Eve prequel episode, we learn about Adam and Eve's adoption and how her father despises her for her powers.
They're just a bunch of freaks.
They're freaks? Look at yourself! Isn't that why you belong there?
Eve's father is now working at Burger Mart.
It's called an honest day's work.
Again, we see Burger Mart used as like a sign of normalcy. Her dad refuses Eve's superpowered gifts and instead embraces working at the burger joint. But Eve attempts to help by creating groceries and even a golden apple they can sell, but her dad refuses.
There, 24 karat, you can sell this.
Turn it back.
Next, we get a nice moment between Amber and Mark on the Eiffel Tower.
He flew her to Paris?
Close. Vegas. Now, I love this little gag because it shows that while Mark might not be able to fly Amber to Paris on her lunch break, he can, however, fly her across the country to Vegas. It provides a perfect sense of balance between the realism and the fantastical sides of the series. Okay, so as we discussed, Season 1 saw Omni-Man kill off all the Guardians of the Globe, including their fishman, Aquarius. Well, to stick with the theme of this episode, Omni-Man's actions are still echoing and falling on the shoulders of Mark.
Since your dad vanished like a fart in a hurricane, Atlantean law dictates that his sentence falls to his next of kin. You.
Meanwhile, the Lizard League attacks. Now, the Lizard League is a play on the Serpent Society from Marvel as well as Cobra from DC. As I mentioned earlier, the Martian was watching a special talking about the late Martian Man that inspired him to become a superhero too.
Martian Man made Earth his home.
I call me the Shapesmith.
Now, Shapeshift is a really fun character from the Invincible comics who first appeared way back in 2004 in issue 18, so it's really great getting to see him join this show. But of course, we have to remember that he has taken on the likeness of astronaut Russ Livingston, whose real body is back on Mars and now under the control of the Sequids.
I got my superpowers in a random industrial accident.
Now back in Atlantis, we see Mark having to go toe-to-toe with this giant beast in what they call trial by combat. Now this reminded me a lot of this scene from Thor Ragnarok.
Any contender who defeats my champion, their freedom they shall win.
Now Mark is able to escape the beast, but after some missiles sent in by Cecil accidentally break the beast's chains, we see it start to slaughter the people of Atlantis. And this is where the episode's theme comes full circle. Mark sympathizes with the people of Atlantis for just wanting justice for what his father did.
All they wanted was justice for what my dad did.
And I love this idea from Cecil when he tells Mark that he is not his father.
You're not your father, Mark.
He says it with the intent of assuring Mark that it's not his responsibility to bear the sins of his father, but Mark uses it as a reminder to do the right thing and to save the Atlanteans.
That's why I'm going back.
Back on the surface, Debbie is showing a house, and we see this abusive POS talking down to his wife.
When you earn the money, you can decide where we live.
And then we can hear Debbie say under her breath,
"She's not your pet."
A callback to this hurtful line from season 1.
She's more like a pet to me.
Okay, so now let's talk about how Donald is back. And spoiler warning, because I'm going to be pulling straight from the comics. So we've seen clones and alternate universes in this series thus far, but those are not how Donald returns. Donald is
a robot.
After his death in the comics, Cecil removed part of Donald's brain and created a robot body. The sad thing is, Donald has no idea.
Sir, when Debbie came to speak with you, she seemed distressed when she saw me.
Back home, Debbie is once again encountered by the faulty cabinet and she finally breaks down.
You mother...
So this episode could have easily focused on Invincible's grief and his grief alone, but they're focusing on Debbie as well and showing us the real, raw emotion you would expect from someone that was betrayed by their partner of almost 20 years, and it is brilliant. I love how this show takes this Saturday morning cartoon style and juxtaposes it with real violence and real world emotions. So back at the Lizard League's headquarters, we are introduced to the Lizard King.
You don't even know my real name. I'm the Lizard King.
Sorry, I meant King Lizard.
King Lizard!
King Lizard has appeared in more than 40 issues of the Invincible comics, and he first appeared in Invincible #9. So over in another universe, we see a variant of Invincible, one of his many evil variants that joined his father in taking over Earth, like we saw in the previous episode.
I didn't get it at first either, but I came around, and you will come around too.
Angstrom, who is now looking more like his comic book counterpart, Evil Doer, is searching the multiverse for answers on how to defeat the Invincible that he blames for the destruction of his mind merger. Now he's doing so by finding Invincibles that have been defeated in other realities.
And they just wore me down. Caught me when I finally had to sleep.
It's here in this other universe that we also meet two female variants of Cecil and Donald.
Who the hell are you?
And I love that we're getting the multiverse in Invincible. And like, I know the multiverse is feeling a little overused in media right now, but Invincible is doing it right. Our post-production manager, Harriet Lingle-Enright, put it best. Invincible is using the multiverse to serve the character and story, rather than using the multiverse to serve up random cameos and consolidate IP. Well guys, that's our breakdown of Invincible Season 2, Episode 2. Big shout out to the writer of this video, Mr. Colton Ogburn. If there's any questions or things you think we missed, let us know in the comments below or at either of us on Twitter. And if it's your first time here, please subscribe, smash that bell for alerts. For ScreenCrush, I'm Ryan Airy.